We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 70a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing situations of grain where the grain is replanted into the ground. And on the previous Amud, Rava asked, what if you have L'inyan Meiser, you have grain that is replanted into the ground? And the Gemara now continues and explains what exactly the question is. The case is the Amdinu va'asrinu, that he estimated, he took off Meiser, v'shaslinu, and then he put it back into the ground, v'hosifa luhu, and then it grew a little more. What's the halacha in that situation? Rashi explains, the Amdinu v'asrinu shekotzar shibol and harbe. It means to say that he harvested a lot of stalks, a lot of ears of grain, v'lo doshan, and he did not thresh them. Ela isran, rather he estimated, took off the proper meisers by estimation, v'shaslam la'osan shal chulin, and then took that which was left, that which was chulin, and put it back into the ground. And we'll continue Rashi here, the Gemara is about to continue. But im tim salomar l'chumr. Now, if you're going to say that we're strict in that situation, the loaz linan basar ikr, that we don't follow the root, lemiftar tosefes mi meiser, and say that whatever grows additionally is exempt. In other words, if you say the tosefes, the additional growth in this situation is chayv in meiser, v'tosefes boy isure, and one does need to take meiser off the tosefes, off that addition, so ikr gufe mai. So what's the halacha by the root? Lemahader boy isure alo, do you need to take off again from the root meiser or not? That's the imtim salomer. If you're going to say that with regards to the tosefes you need to take off meiser, again the Gemara continues, imtim salomar loaz linan basar ikr. If you're going to say we don't follow the root, v'tosefes boy yisure, and the additional growth needs meiser taken off, so ikr mai, what's the halacha by the root itself? And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya said to him, he said to Rava, ma'ishna mikol chite v'sari dialma. Well, what's the difference between this case and let's say we're talking about wheat or barley? Rashi explains, ma'ishna mikol chite v'sari dialma da'afagav demiasri, even though you've taken off meiser ki hadar zaralu, when you replanted boy yisuri, you do need to take off new meiser. So hanami boy yisuri, so the same should be true over here where meiser needs to be taken off. And the Gemara continues, Amar le, he said back to him, Rava said back to Abaya, davar shezaro kol, if it's something which the seed decomposes, so lomi boili, that actually wasn't a question to me, that's why by wheat and barley, certainly new meiser needs to be taken. Elaki kami boili, when was it a question to me, davar she'ein zaro kola, talking specifically about something where the seed does not disintegrate. Rashi explains, davar shezaro kola kagon chite v'sari, for example, the actual wheat or barley, shazera kola bekarko mesachel, then the seed is going to disintegrate in the earth. V'yotza zera yerek uva zera acher, it's like a new zera comes up. So lomi boili, that's not a question. Devadai boy yisure hakol, certainly you need to take off meiser from everything. Tekulo achrini ninu, that's considered something entirely new. But ki kami boili she'ein zaro kol, I'm talking about a situation where the zera is not kol, it doesn't disintegrate. Kagon hachshi bolas, like over here where we're talking about an ear of grain. Sheshoslu, you put it in the ground. Eino ikr misachel, there the ikr, the root, does not disintegrate. Elahole it just grows larger. So mai, what's the halacha? That was the question. Again, mai, that's the question. What's the halacha in this case? And the Gemara continues, Tifshat le'meha, why don't we answer from the following? The Yamar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yitzchak says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Litra botzel shetikno v'zaro misaser lefikulo. Let's say you have a litra of botzel, which is a litra of onion, and Rashi says shetikno means she'isra, that meiser was taken off, v'zaro, and then it was planted, kilomar shashaslo, meaning to say it was put into the ground. Again, shetikno v'zaro was put back into the ground, so misaser lefikulo, so one does take off meiser off the entire thing. And Rashi explains, misaser lefikulo shetzarach la'aser af litra rishona, even the original litra, that's a certain weight, even that you have to take meiser. Al mahadar bo yisuri, you see from this statement, you do need to take off meiser again. V'afagav de'ein zaro kol, and even though this is something where the seed does not disintegrate. Lahachi nakat litra, the reason why we're saying litra over here, we're saying the weight, sheyodeya shir mashashasal, the point is he knows the amount that he put in, shayim usr, where meiser was taken off. Nevertheless, he has to take meiser off on the litra as well, and so therefore again it seems that meiser does need to be taken off. And the Gemara continues and says there's a distinction, hasam over there, hainuz riyaso, that is the normal way of planting it, so it makes sense to say in that situation meiser should be taken off, but hach over here by the ear of grain, lav hainuz riyaso, that's not the normal way to plant it, and therefore we might be more lenient in this situation. And the idea is that by the onion, since this is the normal way of planting it, so essentially it's considered like new produce, and that's why meiser needs to be taken off the entire item. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Reb Chanina bar Menyume li Abaye. Reb Chanina bar Menyume said to Abaye, Otzit sheino nakav, with regards to a pot that does not have a hole in it, let's say the grain is growing out of that, so mahu, what's the halacha? The Gemara asks, Ilo nakav, if there's no hole, it's not getting any sustenance from the earth. Halo nakav, so there's no hole, and therefore it's not chayiv on a doraisa level in terms of trumas and meiser. So what's the question? And the Gemara continues, Dilma, maybe what you meant to ask is as follows. Chazar v'nakvo ka'amra. What you were saying, what was, let's say it does not have a hole in it, but then after already it's in the pot, then the individual puts a hole in the pot. That's the question. Hach over here, chadazriyahi ichburehu dechamechabra viola. Over here, it's all considered to be one planting. It's all attached, meaning maybe it's all considered one growth. It's as if it's growing the entire time, and therefore even the part that grew before there was a hole, but that's just considered like taking root in the ground. It hasn't taken root yet. When the hole is placed in the pot, then it takes root in the ground. It gets sustenance from the ground. It's all considered one growth, and therefore meiser needs to be taken off of everything. Whereas hasam over there, in the question we asked above, where something is replanted, shteis rios ninu, that's already two plantings, and that is different. And Rashi explains, first the Gemara asks, Ilo nakav, if there's no hole, halo nakav, there's no hole. V'shaper tarim d'min aptur al aptur, therefore if you're going to take off, let's say within itself, you'll take off truma, that's fine, because you're taking off from something which is exempt on a doraisa level, on something which is exempt on a doraisa level. There's no question there. It's just chayiv in terms of meiser on a derabanan level. And so then, Dilma b'nichusa chazar v'nakvo kamrit, so he responded, maybe you meant to say that then there's a hole that the person puts in the pot. Tahachi kami boilan, that's the question. It has no hole and it grows a little. And then there's a hole, then the person places a hole there. Can you take off meiser there now from that pot itself and consider it all of the same status? If you're going to say, we don't follow the root, and so therefore whatever grows does need meiser on a doraisa level, then you can't take off meiser from the root, from the source on that which grew after. Because then you're taking from what's exempt on something that's chayiv. Or maybe we say, no, the root or the main part is also chayiv, even that which was there before the hole. We follow the additional growth as a stringency, l'chayiv eso ikr, to say that the root is now chayiv. And you are able to take off, to separate from this pot itself for itself. Again, it's similar to the question earlier. Again, you have that has no hole and then it has a hole. Can you take off truma from the part that grew before the hole? And that which grew after the hole. And maybe we say it's all like one planting. And therefore now when you place the hole in the pot, it's like it's beginning to take root. It's all the same. It's all just the process. But by the question of Rava earlier, shteis rios, saying that was two separate plantings. The shibolas in terms of that ear of grain. That's why it was necessary to ask the question over there whether the additional growth causes the root to be chayiv or not. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo asks the following question, Shibola shemorcha bekri, let's say you have ears of grain, and they're smoothed out in a pile, Vishasla, and then they're replanted, Vikarla shema mechuber, and then meiser is separated while it's attached to the ground. Ma'u, what's the halacha? Kaven demorcha, since it was already smoothed out in a pile, Tavlala, so now it becomes like tevel, and it's ready to have meiser taken off. And Kikara Lashem Kadshala, and then when he therefore says now this part is going to be meiser, truma, so then that's going to assume that holiness. Odilmar, maybe Kavan the Shasla, once he replants it, Paka Le Tivla Mina, no longer has the status of tevel, and you can't start separating truma at that point in time. And the Gemara continues, Amrile Rabban li Abaya, so the sages said to Abaya, Imkain, if so, if you're going to say that you can separate truma, so then Matzinu truma b'mechuber lakarka, doesn't that mean that there's now truma by something which is attached to the ground? Utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah, the Mesoras Hashah says there is no such Mishnah, but we learned in a Mishnah, Lo Matzinu truma b'mechuber lakarka, that we don't find that truma takes place when something's attached to the ground. So what's even the question over here? And the Gemara continues, Amar Le said to him, Kitanya, when was that taught? When we say that there's no truma when something is attached to the ground, that's in terms of liability. Let's say liability to the death penalty or liability in a situation of a mistake where you have to pay that added fifth. That's what we're saying. There's no liability. Because if the person detaches and eats it, so then it's talish. It's not mechuber l'karka anymore. That's not a case of mechuber l'karka. And if he bends down and eats it while it's attached to the ground, so badla daito etzel kol adam. That's not a normal way of eating. That's called badla daito etzel kol adam. What he's doing is essentially nullified in the face of normal behavior, and so therefore there's not going to be liability. But that's just in terms of liability. That does not mean that it's not truma at all. But the Gemara continues, but what's the difference between this case and that which was written on the tablet, on the notebook of Ilfa? Let's say you have eggs from a nivlas oftar. That means that you have a dead bird. It's one of the kosher birds. And the egg from that bird, miksasan bachutz, it's like partially laid. Some of it is outside of the body, outside of the orifice of the animal. Umiksasan bifnim, and some of it is actually inside the bird. And so the halacha is mi bifnim, that which is inside, mitamin begodim abeis habliya. That is the same status as a nivlas oftar. The halacha is it's mitamin begodim abeis habliya when it goes down the throat, when it's eaten. So then it causes this tumas begodim. It causes the person to be tamei, his clothing to be tamei. But any of the eggs that are already outside, ain mitamin begodim abeis habliya. Those are not mitamin begodim abeis habliya. And so the question of the Gemara is, if these eggs are still inside of the bird and they're eaten, apparently the fact that that's matami begodim abeis habliya, that is considered to be a normal way of eating. And so that's a question against what we just said above, that if one eats that which is attached to the ground, it's not a normal way of eating. And the Gemara continues and answers talish with regards to something that's totally detached from the ground, like this situation of the bird. So avidi inshi da'achli hachi, there some people will eat it in that fashion. They'll eat it out even though it's within the bird itself. But something attached to the ground, lo avidi inshi da'achli, that people don't generally eat, and therefore that's considered not a normative way of eating. And the Gemara continues, Amar Daf Yomi bar Kisna Amar Shmuel. Daf Yomi bar Kisna says that Shmuel says, Hazorea kilayim ba'atzis sheino nakav. If somebody plants kilayim, again in a pot without a hole, it's not getting any of those nutrients from the earth, also it is forbidden. The Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Bishlami yashmin an loke makas mardus midrabanan shapir. It says over here that it's usr, it's forbidden. Now I understand if it would have said that there's makas mardus, which is malkas midrabanan, so that would make sense. That would already be teaching something. Elo usr, but just to say it's prohibited, my kamashmal, and what's that even teaching us? To midrabanan have zriya, it's teaching us that on a drabanan level it's considered zriya, it's considered planting. But that's no chiddush at all. Tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah in Demai. Tara misheino nakav al hanakav truma v'yachzor v'yitrom. It says that one takes off truma. Let's say one takes off truma from that which doesn't have a hole, a pot which doesn't have a hole, on one which does have a hole. So it is truma, but he has to take off truma again. So you see, at least on a derabanan level, it certainly does have a status of truma, and so therefore that would really not be teaching us anything if you simply say aser. And Rashi explains, Shemercha Bekri, again, the question of the Gemara was with regards to ears of grain that were not threshed, but they were smoothed over in a pile. Shehishvo so berachas, again, they used the pitchfork and they smoothed over the pile. The Zeu Kviyusa Lemaiser, this is what establishes it, that now one is obligated to take off Meiser. V'kara L'Hashem Truma b'mechuber, and so then he called Truma when it was mechuber, he replanted. So Mahum Yav Truma Olo, in that case, is it Truma or not? And Imkain D'chol L'Hashem Truma Matzino, now if it is Truma, doesn't that mean that there's truma by mechuber? And the Gemara says, Kitanya, when was it taught that there's no truma by mechuber? That was just a lo matzino linyan ichyuve ala misa v'chomesh. That just meant there's no liability in terms of misa and chomesh. And if you would detach it to lushi, then it's already detached. V'akati b'mechuber lo mashkachna la. So you don't have any liability still in a situation of mechuber. V'gachan v'yachal. And if we're talking about a case where he bends down and eats it when it's mechuber, k'shaisa mechuber spot l'dai to ezel kol adam. That's not a normal thing to do. V'lo hava achila. That's not called achila. And Rashi continues, what do you mean it's not called achila? Ma'ishna midiksiva pinkasei de ilfa beitzei nevelas oftar. Again, what was written on the tablet of ilfa, you have the eggs of a nevelas oftar. Kagon beitzim hamu'urin betarnagolas, they're in the chicken, umiksasan b'chutz, and some of it is outside the chicken. Shebeshas misase ischila lahatel beitzasa. At the time it was dying, it started to lay those eggs. Mibefnim, that part of the egg which is inside. Kagon imhechnes piv lemeya, he actually sticks his mouth inside the animal. V'achlan befnim, and eats it inside the animal. Matame begodim abeis habliya, that is matame his garments abeis habliya when it reaches the throat when he eats it. Kedin nivlas oftar, like the the din is by any part of a nivla softar, of the carcass of a kosher bird. And Rashi continues, V'adatanya b'gemara debeitza ochel min nivla softar min hashlal shel beitzim tar. There it says pure in a situation of the eggs. Mesuk manami b'tetol shinu v'achlinu avroy. That's talking when it was taken out of the bird and then eaten. Avol achlinu agavoy, but if it's eaten inside, hachanami demitama would be tamei. Al mahave achila. The point is we see that it's considered achila. V'lo amar batla daita. We don't say batla daita. We don't say that that is not normative. And then the Gemara said truma hi v'yachzor v'yitrom. In a situation where the pot does not have a hole, you take off that truma. It is truma, but one has to take off truma again. Again, the case over there was misha eino nokov al hanokov. One takes off truma from the pot with no hole on the pot with a hole. So it is truma, but he has to do it again min hanokov. He has to take off properly from the pot with the hole. But the point is, alma midachayla leshem truma zriya midrabban. You see from the fact that it still is truma, that's at a drabanan level, it means that it's considered planting. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, hachitin v'hasaorin, the wheat and the barley, v'hakuzmin v'hashibolas shul v'hashifon, and the spelt and the oats and the rye, harei elu chayavin b'chala. Those 5 grains, they're all chayav in chala. Umitzdarfen zemzeh, they also combine with one another. V'asurim b'chodesh milifnei Pesach, and they're also asur in terms of new grain from before Pesach. They change the gears over here to milifnei ha'omer, from before the omer. Once the omer comes, there's no isser of chodesh. Umiliksor milifnei ha'omer, and they change the gears here to umiliksor milifnei Pesach. You're not allowed to harvest it before Pesach. And in mishrishu kodem lomer, if they took root before the Omer, then we say Ha'omer Matir, and then we say that when the Omer is brought, that's Matir, that permits it, that's the permission of the new grain. V'im lav, and if not, if it didn't take root before the Omer, Asur, not Sheyavo Ha'omer Haba, then it's going to be forbidden until the next Omer. Rashi explains, Umitzdarfen Zemzeh, they combine with one another, Mefarsh B'Gemara, that's all going to be explained in the Gemara. V'asur b'chodesh lachol, and they're asur as new grain in terms of eating the new grain. And the Gemara says Tana was taught kusmin with regards to spelt min chitim. That's considered in the category of chitim, in the category of wheat. And shibolas shual v'shifon, and with regards to the oats and rye, min sa'orin, that's a type of barley. And the Gemara continues, kusmin, what is kusmin? And Rashi explains, kusmin min chitin, kusmin's in the category of wheat. That's l'inyan chala. As far as chala is concerned, itzrich, that's why this is necessary to be taught. Kedamrina b'Meseches chala, because we say Meseches chala, hachitin ein mitzdarfen im hakol. Wheat does not combine with all the other grains. Chutz min hakusmin, it only combines with kusmin. That's considered in the same category. And hasa'orim mitzdarfen im hakol, chutz min hachitin, and barley can combine with everything except for wheat. And Rashi continues, V'hai datana lehacha, the reason why this is taught over here, mishum demastis and ari b'chala, because the Mishnah is dealing with chala, v'katani mitzdarfen zem zen, it mentions that they combine with one another, v'asa tosefta lefrushan, so the tosefta is coming to explain that in more detail, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Amid Beis.